As we look across different time horizons and extend the forecast period, the information we have access to and the detail and preciseness of that information changes. That said, the foundational concepts of cash forecasting and liquidity planning have to be the same.
Welcome to Actualizing Success. In this podcast series, our in-house advisors discuss today's finance and technology topics with an emphasis on solutions that embrace tomorrow.
Hi, my name is Sabia from Actualize Consulting, and today I have my colleagues, Michelle Dudar and Matthieu Larrivee. Welcome, Michelle and Matthieu. Today we are going to talk about managing cash with effective liquidity planning. Liquidity planning is essential to mitigate financial risks, such as unexpected cash flow fluctuations or liquidity issues, while efficiently managing cash and debt balances. Liquidity planning is relatively new terminology. Matthieu, how does it differ from cash flow forecasting?
Thanks, Karen. Liquidity planning can be seen as an extension of the cash forecasting process. If you had to describe cash over time, the past would be your actuals, where everything is accurate. Today is your cash position. You hope to have good enough information to make the right investment borrowing decision. The next 7 days to 13 weeks are your cash forecast. Your figures won't be as accurate, but you should be close enough that you could determine the best week for a debt issuance or to select specific dates for commercial paper maturities, for example. Beyond 13 weeks, you're starting to blend into liquidity planning. There will be more uncertainty around the figures. However, it's an important process and one you want to improve over time. In your liquidity plan, you're not necessarily trying to get to an exact number. For example, what will be my available cash 6 months from now? You want to consider various scenarios to get to a range of possible values. As the time horizon grows, so does uncertainty. Planning for uncertainty is a key component of the liquidity planning process.
Thanks, Matthieu. Michelle, as we look at current environment, why is liquidity planning so important to treasurers today?
Thanks, Karen. The investing and borrowing landscape has changed dramatically over recent years. We've seen interest rates rise significantly and need to consider if they'll remain constant, continue to rise, or start to fall. We now work in a global environment where we source goods from around the world, and events such as wars and weather can and do affect the supply chain. This can have an impact on exchange rates, pricing, timing of delivery, production of goods, and for the Treasury Group, receipt and disbursement of funds. As we look across different time horizons and extend the forecast period, the information we have access to and the detail and preciseness of that information changes. That said, the foundational concepts of cash forecasting and liquidity planning have to be the same.
Absolutely, Michelle. Liquidity planning is an extension of cash flow forecasting, and there's a lot of key components that need to be managed. As Matthieu mentioned, cash flow forecasting looks at predictive future cash inflows and outflows over a specific period of time to identify potential shortfalls or surpluses in cash reserves to make better informed investment and funding decisions. Treasury and FP&A may have the same forecast over the mid to long term. However, FP&A's forecast is commonly based on assumptions applied to GL data. Treasury's shorter term forecast is daily and can extend out to an average of 13 weeks. The forecast uses inputs from actual cash flows from the bank statements and may apply assumptions to FP&A data to adjust for cash settlement timing. As we look at working capital management, managing the company's current assets and liabilities ensures that there is enough liquidity to cover day-to-day operations. This includes monitoring inventory levels, accounts receivable, and accounts payable. In addition, it may be necessary to earmark cash for payments such as taxes and capital expenditures. Another key component is investments. The investment policy establishes guidelines for investing excess cash reserves to generate higher returns and maintain liquidity as needed. Foreign exchange is very important, ensuring you are tracking restricted and trapped cash, plan for cash repatriation, M&A, and building a plan for managing FX exposure. Your variance analysis is also a very important exercise. Measuring your actual cash flow versus forecast and provide visibility into your forecast accuracy, as well as the nature of a forecast variance. Whether they are the result of timing or operational differences, you should always be reviewing your cash forecast variances.
And as the forecast period extends beyond weeks and potentially into years, liquidity planning has a number of other factors to consider. Building various versions of the plan and changing the inputs allows Treasury to understand the impact on debt, cash, and compliance on events such as changing interest rates, currency fluctuations, or supply chain disruptions. This stress testing identifies risks and opportunities and provides valuable information for developing strategies and contingency planning. With relatively high interest rates today, it seems ideal to use excess cash to pay down debt and decrease borrowing costs. To do so, it's important to determine whether long or short-term funding is required and when debt can be repaid. However, when looking out over a longer-term horizon, it may be determined that it's necessary to build a cash reserve instead. The liquidity plan also identifies compliance risks that should be considered when renegotiating credit facilities or the terms of a long-term debt issue. Perhaps debt metrics need to be relaxed or pay-down provisions added. The plan may also give indications of compliance breaches, which would affect credit ratings, the interest rate on borrowings, or trigger debt repayments. More than ever, it's imperative to maintain open communication channels with key stakeholders, including lenders, rating agencies, and internal departments. And as we all know today, transparency is key.
Michelle, they're all very good points. As we extend the forecast timeline, the information we have and the accuracy of its changes, which is a huge challenge for treasury groups. Matthieu, what are some of the other liquidity planning challenges?
Yeah, I have a few examples of challenges where not having a proper liquidity plan will make the situation even more challenging. Multinationals often operate in countries or use financing structures that make it difficult to repatriate funds in a timely manner. From that perspective, it's important to have a liquidity plan that is as accurate as possible to time fund repatriations or capital injections. Thinking of access to credit or the cost of liquidity, having a quality liquidity plan will enable a business to seek the credit and the credit term it needs at the best possible time. Having a well-tuned liquidity planning process allows the finance department to not only look at the most likely outcome, but consider various scenarios, such as acquisitions, asset sales, or changes in market conditions.
With these in mind, when Treasury is preparing a forecast, it's essential that they understand the organizational requirements, where forecast inputs are coming from, is the data reliable, and who their audience is. Also essential to know what the forecast is being used for. Michelle or Matthieu, what are some of the best practices as Treasury moves from the cash flow forecasting to liquidity planning?
Yeah, thanks, Karen. To develop a robust process for forecasting cash flows, you would use a multitude of data sources, such as projections based on historical data, sales and expense estimates, payroll, and forecasted tax payments. You need to update the forecast regularly to reflect changing market conditions and business circumstances. Another thing is that you want to forecast at the appropriate level of details. This might mean that for some business units, as an aggregate, you would do a projection of the revenues based on historical trends, but that for other businesses that are more dynamic, you would frequently communicate with them to get an up-to-date forecast. Within the organization, you need to align on clear ownership of forecast inputs and maintain close working relationship with the teams providing inputs to help ensure your plan has the latest and greatest information. Another important best practice is to use the same set of cash flow categorizations or categorizations that can roll up into figures that are compatible for your actuals and forecasts so that they can be compared to each other using variance analysis tools. As Karen mentioned earlier, a strong variance analysis tool will answer the following questions. How close was my forecast to the actuals? How has my forecast evolved over time? And for a time period, could be the current month or current quarter, given the actuals to date and my forecast, how close am I predicting to land to my original projection? When you run variance analysis, you must define materiality thresholds. This will help you focus your energy identifying the variance drivers on the items you have some control over and identify those that you cannot change. Once you have the process and tools in place, you need to monitor your liquidity metrics, track performance against targets, and review your liquidity planning strategies periodically.
And with all these moving parts, Matthieu, it's important to invest in technology to help create a liquidity plan. There is cash flow forecast software, data analytic tools, and treasury management systems to run scenarios, highlight areas to stress test, and ultimately help make a better and more informed decision. As I mentioned earlier, communication and transparency are key.
Thanks a lot, Michelle. Aligning cash forecasting and liquidity planning creates a streamlined process that updates your financial position with real-time data. Having a clear list of goals to achieve during the project and KPIs to track after the process is live will indicate how the project team implemented the tool and how the business utilizes it, ultimately ensuring you can measure the project's success. On behalf of Michelle, Matthieu, and me, thank you for joining us on our discussion on effective liquidity planning.
Thanks for joining us for today's episode of Actualizing Success. Make sure to visit us online at www.actualizeconsulting.com, where you can explore our service offerings. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on iTunes, Spotify, or your preferred platform. If you've enjoyed what we talked about today, please consider leaving a review and following us on LinkedIn. If you have any questions or would like to share your opinions with us, please send us a note at podcast@actualizeconsulting.com. We look forward to hearing from you.